Julie, we're live. We did it.
We did it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Self-Publishing Insiders. I'm Jim Azevedo, and I lead marketing and corporate communications here at Draft Digital. And today, it is my pleasure to welcome Julie Cropp Gareleck with us to the show. Let me read you a little bit about Julie's bio here before I kind of turn over the spotlight to Julie. So as a best-selling author, a CEO, and an entrepreneur, Julie Cropp Gareleck is a respected and trusted leader in business communities that extend from the Northeast of the US down to the Southeast of the US. And this community, these relationships involve CEOs and entrepreneurs, not just small to mid-sized businesses, but also as well as the Fortune 1000. Julie's latest book, Dare to Become, From the Corner Booth to the Corner Office, I've read it. It's great. It's an intimate, authentic account of how she learned to become a business leader. There are no shortcuts or life hacks. I would say that this book is truly a roadmap, or better yet, it's a treasure map for anyone who's ever dared to believe that they too can achieve success. So Julie, thank you for being here. I know you don't have the most time in the world, but thanks so much. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here.
So I was telling you backstage, and I'll share this with our audience too, that at Draft Digital, we report some of our book sales to the New York Times, to USA Today, and sometimes as we put these lists together, and for some smaller publications as well. And we put these lists together, of course, both genre fiction, and we take a look at the nonfiction numbers as well. And then your book just kind of popped out to me. I'm like, who is this lady? What's this book about? Then as I started going through it, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. We need to get her on the show, because I felt that at Draft Digital, we sort of cater to authors who, they're like career authors. They're the ones who have moved from being aspiring authors to selling books and then realizing that, hey, I'm talented enough to keep doing this. I love writing. I love the artistry of it. I love the craft. But I want to get to that next level. And a lot of them are moving toward that place of, quitting the day job and moving to having their writing as their career going forward.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, this has been a busy week for me. And they're all busy. So I've kind of adopted your catchphrase, your favorite catchphrase in the book. Yes. I'm fine. It's fine. It's all going to be fine.
And it will. It will. It might not seem like it, but it will.
Sometimes it doesn't. So I kind of wanted to kick this conversation off, Julie, because right off the bat with your dedication, you say that, this book is dedicated to those who aspire to be and dare to become. You didn't say that this is for people who want to start a business, or this is for entrepreneurs, or anything like that. Was that a conscious decision? Tell me how you came to that dedication.
It was, as we were even looking at the title of the book, right? And we're settling in on Dare to Become, and we had come up with all these other titles that were like the accidental entrepreneur, right? Because I quit my job and started, my business the next day and things like that. Yeah. But really what it felt like is that, this book really starts when I was a 16-year-old, living in a small town. And I had these aspirations of what my life could be. And throughout my career, I was systematic and I was pragmatic in moving closer to those goals. And so the book is really meant to be an inspiration for people who are aspiring to be someone, whether it's a business owner or a business leader. It could even just be a leader in your field. But in order to get there, you do have to dare yourself to become that person. And so it really was meant really truly as how I felt, is that, I did have all of these aspirations, and I look back and I really did dare myself to become who I am today.
I love it. So where does that pragmaticism come from? Now, as I understand it, you've got this long list of family members who are entrepreneurs. Like, it's just kind of in your blood. So did you always feel that someday you're going to have your own business?
So I would say no. Growing up, both of my parents worked for corporate America, right? My mom worked at a bank for over 25 years. My dad worked in corporate America for over 20 years before they bought the Avenue restaurant, before they bought their first real business.
That's a great story. I love how you keep going back to the Avenue in the book. It's great. tell everybody what the Avenue is for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah,
Just real quick.
so the Avenue Restaurant is a casual dining restaurant that was located in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We served breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Opened at 6, closed at 9, and my parents decided, after my dad had achieved some success in his corporate job, he was traveling 40% of the time. He was never.
40%.
It was terrible, and
That's
so he and my mom had this conversation, and she said, "You know what? Just do it." Right. I mean, the best thing is you'll still be working 60 hours a week, but we know where to find you. Like we can drive to the restaurant to see you. And so they took this huge leap of faith and to trust in their own capabilities. And what I will tell you though, is my aunts and uncles had businesses as well, right? They were small business owners. Back to my grandparents and my great uncles, they were flower shop owners. They had toy shops. So I do think some of it was in our nature. I will say for me, until I had this experience of working for my parents at the family restaurant, I had never thought that that was where my life was going to go. I was going to be a journalist. I was going to be writing newspaper articles that for some beat that no one had ever heard of. But I will say that experience shifted my perspective of what was possible. And so after I had, earned some experience, I had worked for other people, I really did ultimately find my way back to starting my own business. So not how I would have initially started it, but that experience really was the catalyst for opening my eyes to what was possible.
I noticed that around that time, you took a leap of faith. When you moved to France as a 21-year-old, and you've discussed, it's kind of a recurring theme through the book about sort of moving out of your comfort zone, and that's a scary thing to do, to move to another country. And you spoke the language, but were you fluent when you left at 21?
Oh, no, I mean it was my second major, and could I pass all of the exams? For sure. But I truly believe that fluency comes from living and breathing the environment that you're in, or at least for me, that's how it was. And so when I moved there, the comprehension was fluent. Like I could understand everything, but it's so much faster than French language class. And so it was definitely a steep learning curve. And I fought it. I mean, I fought it for the first probably 3 to 4 weeks, just allowing myself to let that be the language that I would speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, when did you first realize that moving out of your comfort zone, or I should say, when did you first realize that you were starting to become comfortable with being uncomfortable? Because I think that that is like a superpower that I've noticed in successful people and, entrepreneurs and business leaders and best-selling authors as well.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I have taken a lot of leaps of faith in my career.
They're peppered throughout the book.
I definitely have done it. And you know what I would say? I would say that, and this is actually kind of an interesting way to think about it. Some people will view opportunities and see the 10 negative things that could prevent them from going. Like, for example, moving to Europe at 21, I knew no one. I was working in a different language. I just never stopped, I don't think, to panic about all of the things that could have gone wrong. I think that I looked at it as, I'd always told my friends, I'm going to one day live in Paris. And then here I was, right? And so I think to some degree, some of these leaps of faith, while they might have seemed natural because that was the natural progression, I do think that it was like these small series of steps that were happening that was the last final push. So it didn't feel to me like I was doing this great big thing. It just felt like, well, here we are. Like this is what I talked about. I got into the program, I got the right visa, and now I'm on the plane. And so, I'm good at taking risks, but I like managed risks. So, I'm not someone
they're calculated.
Correct. Yes. And that was one too, that like I saw this program and I was like, wow, that would be so cool. I investigated. I was like, I've got a little shot of getting in the program. I got in, and then I was like, oh, wow, here I go. And so I think that I just didn't allow myself to think all the way forward, because I do think if we get too far out in front of ourselves, we won't do anything, right? Like we'll be paralyzed for the fear of what.
Absolutely. It's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And to that point, I noticed too in your book, another recurring theme that, you don't explicitly say to your readers, like, I had this plan. Sometimes you do, but for all these different major moves that you've made, when you've made these leaps, you didn't explicitly say I had a plan, but sometimes you kind of did. Like when you moved to France.
Yes.
And then we have to talk about the bad manager experience.
It was a big one.
Julie, so a lot of us out here, I would say probably almost all of us have had at least one experience with a boss or a manager who was just, what's the word I'm looking for? Out of sorts. How about just bad? Just
not great, not ideal.
Not great.
Yeah.
So Julie tells this experience of, it was a work trip, right?
It was a work trip, yes.
Right. And there, late nights, a lot of preparation. As those of you who know and travel for work know, there's just like when you go on business trips, it's not glamorous. There's a lot of work involved. There's long, long days with dinners, late night dinners, sometimes after parties, then early morning breakfasts. But Julie's manager was angry with her because he didn't want to go with the team to a rave after hours. So can you elaborate on that story and then tell what happened?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, it literally was a situation where we were doing a strategy workshop for the entire week, which is grueling, right? We're meeting with 20, 30 stakeholders. We're in one room with all of these people all day long, and all you're doing is talking. And you're not talking about like, what colors do we like? We're actually talking about like, what are the business goals? What are the units? Who's in charge? Right. And so at the end of a very long day, I was actually starting to feel not so great. So I had a fever. During the time of the swine flu before COVID. Swine flu was actually a pretty—
should have been a wake-up call for everybody.
It should have been. And the guy on the plane on the way there had it. I knew it when I sat next to him. I thought, I'm going to get what this guy has like in the next 4 hours. And so I'd started to get a fever. And so I'd ask them like, hey, are we doing a business dinner? And we weren't doing a dinner with the client. And I said, if we aren't going to talk about business, would it be all right if I just went to the pharmacy, got, some cough medicine, maybe some, medication, and just kind of ate in my room and tried to sleep it off?
Yeah. Asking permission to take care of yourself.
Correct. And he just looked at me and he was like, well, no, like we're going to a rave. And I was like, and I thought he was kidding because I don't know, just who would expect this on a work trip with,
Right.
But, and I just kind of looked at him and thought, I was like, oh, and he's like, and you were supposed to drive. And I just kind of said, well, if it's all right, I'm really not feeling well. So I would really like to just go back to my room. And so I did. And as a result of that decision, he became very angry. He became very upset. And that next morning when we met in the lobby, all three of them were hungover and smelled like they had been at a bar the night before. Yeah. And he proceeded to tell me, even though I had had a fever, was coughing this horrible, raspy, like cough. Wow. And he said, well, now you have to lead the meeting all day. And
you have to lead the meeting, not leave the meeting. Lead.
No, lead it, as in be the one standing up in front. And I could barely keep my head up, right? Yeah. And so we went through the day, and the main stakeholder at the client was fully aware that they were hungover and pulled me aside in the ladies' restroom and said to me, we're calling this now. We're ending this early. I want this done. This is ridiculous. And so I literally had to come up with, because he was already mad at me because I didn't go. So I had to come up with a way to deliver this message without it coming across exactly how it was delivered to me. And so I went out and just said, hey, folks aren't engaged. They kind of want to cut it early. And he said, I will end it when I say it's done. And so he continued on. The stakeholder actually came up to him then and cut it and said, we're done. We're ending this now. But then after that, we came back, to the offices. I was very sick and had to work from home. But from the moment we got into the car on the way back to Atlanta, he was berating me, berating my performance, calling me, incompetent, sending me rapid fire emails. Where is this? Why isn't this done? And remember, this was also before work from home existed for anybody. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I tried to do what I could. One of the other managers who was on that trip was actually trying to help me out because he knew what was happening. And he's like, I'm so sorry, Julie, I'll do what I can. And I said, look, I can't even open my eyes, let alone do a 45-page PowerPoint summary of what we discussed. And ultimately, once I was feeling better, I went back into the office, but I was nervous, right? Like it was such an awful way to be treated.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I went back in and I was rounding the corner to go into my boss's office to let him know I was back.
Here comes the good part, everybody.
This is the good part. I'm sorry. This is the long way of getting there, but I walked into his office and I could smell the cigarettes, the stale cigarette smell. And I said, you know what? Today is my last day. And I quit.
Woohoo.
I had no preconceived notion. I had no thought. It had never even crossed my mind.
You didn't wake up that morning and say, this is the morning, like you didn't type out a resignation letter, none of that. You just
nothing.
Yeah.
It was just the way, I don't know if it was the way he looked at me. I don't know if it was a mixture of all of it, but in that moment, I thought, gosh, no, not after. Yeah. I think in that moment, I chose me. I chose myself. And I knew I trusted enough in myself that even if I quit this job, I'd find another one, or I would figure out what the next step was. And in that moment, I didn't allow any of those other thoughts to cloud my judgment. I just made a split decision, and I'm so glad that I did.
I love it. And congratulations for doing that, because I think some of us, we kind of pigeonhole ourselves into a corner. Yeah. We're stuck, we're scared because, here's this paycheck that's coming in, too bad. I hate my life right now, but at least I have a paycheck.
Yeah. And maybe go ahead. If I was maybe in a different situation, I mean, I did have money saved, but I have to be honest, none of that even crossed my mind the moment I did it. I wasn't even, I just think it was just the moment, the inflection, the feelings that I had had that last week, and even being asked to go to a rave with 3 men, right? It was so far beyond rational business behavior in my mind that I just made that split decision. And again, though, I also had faith in my ability to recover, right? Like whether it was financially or to find another job, I was marketable. So not everybody will have that same luxury of being confident, right? To jump out and make a decision like that. So I don't advocate that everyone go quits their job.
I don't either. I've done it before and I didn't plan it as well. I didn't have like a huge cushion.
Yeah.
But when I left, it was like, oh, that was probably one of the best decisions of my life. Looking back, it's easier to say that, of course, too. But it kind of forces you to take control. And I think that's one of the attributes of being a self-published author, an indie author, is that ability to take control and to have to make those decisions, to decide when your manuscript is going to be published and become a published book, your title, the prices of your work, all of that stuff. But it can also be terrifying. Yes. And I like how you explained how you got to the point where you're now at the point in your career where you're starting to trust yourself and trust your intuition. It can take a while sometimes, though.
Well, and I think 10 years sooner, if I'd have been 10 years younger, would I have made that decision? Absolutely not. I really wouldn't have. I just think that I had reached a place, though, where I was confident enough. I did have 10 years of experience under my belt, right? So to some degree, I knew that I would land, right? It might take a while, and and even starting my business, it took longer than I thought, but I still had enough wherewithal. But when I was right out of college, I would not have made that decision. In fact, in those environments I was in, I kind of took it. You know what I mean? I put up with behavior that wasn't necessarily ideal because I knew I had to, right? Just because I didn't have other options at that point.
Yeah, out of college, I think we're all kind of taught that, well, okay, now's the time where you have to go into boot camp and just get beat up by bad managers and the workload and the lack of sleep and the stress and everything else. And then you start to figure it out little by little if you survive it in the first place. But here's the next point that I want to touch upon, because you did this, you had this huge sense of relief, which is fantastic, I think. But you didn't like say, hey, I'm just I've got some money saved up. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. I'm going to take a month off. I'm going to go travel. You had your alarm set for 6:30 the next morning and you got to it.
I did.
Can you tell our audience why that was necessary to you, why you decided not to take, probably a well-deserved break, but why you decided not to take a break?
Yeah, because you know what? Like in that moment, I didn't quit my job because I wanted more vacation time, because I needed time off. But I knew that in order to get to the next stage, right? In this case, I decided, you know what? I've quit my job. I'm now going to commit myself to starting my own business. And so I did. I was very disciplined in working regular hours, treating it as if I was going to work. I wasn't scheduling a hair appointment and then going to get my nails done. And I
Yeah.
really truly kept that business schedule because, being a business owner or being an entrepreneur takes discipline. Being a writer takes discipline, right?
Sure.
And you have to, even though sometimes it's hard to sort of quell the creativity and be so process driven, but I knew for me that I needed that structure and that framework to keep me moving forward.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Um, you mentioned kind of a responsibility aspect to it. I think that's a perfect segue to sort of talk about the money aspect to it, because that's a big deal for authors. A lot of authors come into it because they love the craft. They love the
Yes.
artistry of creating their work, whether it's genre fiction or whether it's nonfiction. But one thing I wanted to ask you in particular, what advice would you give to an author who is contemplating leaving their day job? Maybe they're starting to see some book sales and they're earning some income from their books every month, but maybe they're not quite at the point where the income from their book sales is replacing what they're making from the day job. How do they take a justifiable, calculated next step to moving into becoming a full-time writer as a career?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good one, because I will say this, if you are starting to see the book sales go up and things like that, you have to remember that yes, even though this is a craft that you love, this is still a business, right? And so this is still a way to earn a living. And so what I would encourage writers to do is put down a plan, put pen to paper. You don't have to come up with 55 things on a
Hmm.
list that you're going to do. I want you to come up with 3 things. What does success look like, right? If you're going to go do this full time, what does success look like? Not just from a this is how much money I want to make, but what does
Hmm.
success look like if this is what you're doing full time? Do you want to do this from 9 to 5? Are you going to commit yourself to doing this 8 hours a day? Like write down those 3 things and then have a plan where you feel comfortable enough to say, okay, when I hit this number of book sales, or when I've got my social media marketing in place, when I've got an idea of what I want this to look like, then take those steps to get there. It doesn't happen overnight. Even as writing a book doesn't happen overnight either. It takes time. But I cannot stress enough the importance of having a plan. And the plan does not have to be a 60-page business plan. Start with 3 pages. Outline, like I said, what your goals are, how you're going to make money. Is it just book sales? Are you going to do some speaking? Do you have
Mm.
online content that you can
Some
sell?
merch to sell. Yeah.
Exactly. Merchandise, like put those things together and then just move towards putting those things into place such that when you make that jump, you know what you're jumping into. You may not know how it's all going to work out, right? But you at
Yeah.
least have a framework to follow before you take that leap to kind of walk away from, employment that keeps you comfortable, right? It keeps you
Yeah.
financial.
Yeah. It's easier to get there if you know where you're going and you have the steps to help you along the way. Hence
Correct.
the treasure map I was talking about
Yes.
earlier. When you talk to aspiring entrepreneurs, what's your advice as far as how they should look at reaching profitability? Do you give them a timeline? And if so, what should they be looking at realistically? And
Yeah.
I imagine it's going to depend on the industry that they're in as well.
It can, but here's what I will tell you. When I started my business, I convinced myself that in 12 months, I would have replaced my salary and then some. The reality
Hmm.
is, it took 18 months, right?
Yeah.
I would
Well, that's
say
not bad. I mean,
it's not
gosh.
bad. In my experience, 18 to 24 months working a business, and I mean working it, not just
Yeah.
doing it on the side as a side hustle. I mean working it and working to grow your clients. Within 18 to 24 months, you should see revenue. I mean, it'll come in sooner. It did for me as well. But in terms of the size of your revenue, it really does take a year to 2 years to build that. And I would also say, from a profitability standpoint, If you can, while you're building it, build your business with the profit in mind. A lot of times people focus so much on, I want to go sell 10,000 books, 10,000 t-shirts, 10,000 of this, and then I'll make this much money. But the challenge is, if you're just focused on that metric, you could get that number and realize that you've lost $500,000 or $50,000 or $10,000. So you always have to look at, what are you selling? What does it cost you? And then what should that margin look like at the end of the year?
Interesting. And you mentioned also in your book, expect nothing.
Yes.
Set your expectations accordingly.
Yes.
Because there are pitfalls. Entrepreneurialism, businesses, they don't just grow like this. It's a bumpy road, isn't it?
Oh, it's completely a bumpy road. And I do think that where entrepreneurs and business owners, and myself included, where I have fallen short is when I've set the expectation so high, so unrealistic, that I'm so crushed when I don't hit this big goal that really, quite frankly, isn't attainable. And so when you start out with a business, you cannot expect that people are going to want to read your book. Look, when I launched my book,
when people don't know you.
They don't know who I am. They didn't know I was an author. People are like, you wrote a book? I mean, so when I started and launched my book, my expectation could not be that I was going to hit the USA Today bestsellers list in the first week. Would that have been great? Oh yeah, it would have been so great. But realistically, that's not an expectation that I should have had. Could my expectation have been, because I'd planned for months and I'd marketed the book, I had pre-sales. Could I have expected that first week sales were pretty good? Yes, I could have. And so I tell people to expect nothing, because you are building something, right? And so you cannot just wake up and expect that people are going to support you, that people are going to fund you, that your products are going to fly off the shelves. And if you think with that mentality, you will be surprised by how far you go.
Right. Now, did you set those expectations yourself, or did you have a network of mentors to guide you? She laughs, to guide you along this path?
No, I learned these things. I wish somebody would have told me these things.
We've got all these resources here.
I know, but you know what's interesting is I do wish someone would have said to me, Julie, give yourself 18 to 24 months. Because when I hit month 12, I was depressed. I felt terrible about myself. I felt like a failure. And I wasn't a failure. I was building something. And I wish that somebody would have looked at me and been like, you've got this. Hang on, keep going. You've got some clients, keep going. And so that's why I talk about this in my book, is because if I can help one person who's on their journey realize that instead of focusing on big picture every day, focus on the things that are achievable every day, and you'll get there, right? But you just have to level set that expectation. Otherwise, you're going to feel terrible. For years, I felt terrible about myself. And then I realized, like, what am I doing? Like, this is not a good plan. So no, but I did have mentors around me. I had some great people in my network that I learned from, that let me ask them 100 questions. So I do think there's power in your people, in building a community around yourself.
100%. That's something that we talk about all the time. And I love this community so much, because everybody is so giving of their time and of their expertise and of their experiences in particular. I mean, people love talking about their successes and how they became successful. But what really helps us all kind of rise is talking about our failures and how, I blew that book launch, or whatever the case may be. That's where we all learn together as well.
Yeah. And that's why I share those down experiences in the book too, because as you and I were talking, before we started today, is that it's in the rising and falling that we evolve. And honestly, I do feel like it's in the falling that we learn and we grow and we become stronger as we move forward. And so without those moments of adversity or those terrible experiences that we've had, and I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have kept on, moving forward like I have.
Yeah, and it's so necessary. And I think once you move through that and you successfully move through that, it kind of builds up your armor. And you realize that, this has happened before. I've got this. I landed on my feet before. I'm going to land on my feet again.
Yes.
On the topic of revenue,
Mhm.
you really put your foot down in the book about how careful you have to be with the numbers and the tracking. A
Yes.
lot of these folks that are listening and watching, you know, they're building their businesses. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm probably sort of more old school mentality than most people, but even though I've had my business for 16 years, I still take a low salary, right? So I don't pay myself more than $3,000 a month, which to some people you're like, wait, what? I don't understand. But I've actually always done that because as the business grew and we became more
Hmm.
successful and we became more profitable, I found that I was making better decisions for how we spent the money. I wasn't
Hmm.
wasting money on $4,000 Mac computers for our design team because guess what? The PCs work just fine and the creative software works the same. And
Yeah.
so I actually let the
But the
math.
Macs are so pretty.
I know there's right, but again, like when you're starting out, like a lot of people think, oh, this is so great. I'm going to go spend money here. I'm going to hire all these people.
Yeah.
All of these things take money, and so I never wanted to be in a situation where I didn't have enough money put back to pay payroll,
Hmm.
to pay my staff. And I wanted to make sure that even as we achieved greater success, because we have, and the business has grown, and I've been very blessed over the last 16 years, but I never wanted to get comfortable with those resources. And so I still operate from a bit of scarcity, meaning that, hey, in those early days, I didn't
Yeah.
have a lot of financial resources, but I did more with less. And so then as I've grown, I've still not forgotten what that feels like. And so I can tell you where every single dollar goes. I can
Yeah.
tell you exactly how much money I have in my bank account and how far that will get me because we can't ever predict a bad year. And
Right.
that catches a lot of people off guard. You could have a fantastic year, and the next year you're not doing well, and you're going, wait, I don't understand what
That
happened.
happens in this industry a lot. Like, oh,
All the
my books are
time.
killing it at Amazon, and now they're down to zero, and they're picking up a little bit up at Apple, but not at Barnes and Noble. And why is this happening? I don't get it.
Exactly. So my best advice is to never get comfortable. Don't let
Yeah.
yourself get so comfortable that you lose sight of where that money's coming from and do you have enough? And so again, I'm not saying pay yourself $3,000 a month because I'm probably crazy for doing that, but I got to be honest with you, it kept me very disciplined even from a spending side is that,
Yeah.
and at the end of the year, I take the lion's share of the profit. So you know what? Like I still do fine, but I always say to myself, it's almost like a challenge every month to keep
Yeah.
growing, to keep hitting towards that goal. And I never get sort of just comfortable where I'm at to where I'm not pushing myself every month to do more
Yeah.
and to do more.
Yeah. And I've been in this industry long enough to remember the days, the early days of when the publishing industry became democratized and authors are putting out their ebooks. And a lot of those authors who were the pioneers with self-publishing in the early days were romance authors who had their rights reverted back to them from the largest
Yeah,
traditional publishers.
yeah,
And all of a sudden their ebooks are just they're just exploding, they're making all this money, and then the market's growing like this, but then it leveled off. And
yep.
then panic mode set in because nobody had planned appropriately.
Well,
One of
yeah.
the Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, and this kind of reminded me of one of the stories in your books where you're talking about, I think it was your biggest client at the time,
Yes.
uh, who informed you right in the middle of it was a lunch engagement, I believe. You got this phone call and they're notified you that they're pulling back. They weren't going to renew the contract,
Yeah.
and you felt the blood rush out of your face. But
Yes.
like once again,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, we've got 90 days to
Yes.
figure out how to get this revenue back.
Mhm.
Let's go. Like you guys
Yeah.
didn't sit around and cry in your drinks. You got to work.
No, I
You
was
figured it
definitely
out.
I was definitely depressed that day. But just like I had done when I quit my job, the next day I just said, "Hey, I've got 90 days. The time clock starts here." We still
Yeah.
had their revenue coming in for 90
Hmm.
days. And I didn't sleep a lot.
Yep.
I was working around the clock, but I replaced 80% of that revenue in 90 days. And I got to
80%
tell
of
you,
them.
80% of that big amount, and didn't have to fire one person, didn't have to cut back in any area.
Yeah.
And so I really, for me, that was a great test to, can I cut it? Because it was a 7-figure deal. And so I
Ouch.
wasn't replacing 50 grand. I was replacing a significant piece of business. And so I pieced it all together with different clients, and I went out and found as many opportunities as I could. But it was such a great lesson to me, because what I also encourage people, and you just talked about it, so it's so funny, we were thinking the same thing. When you invest all of your time and focus on those ebooks, I did that with this client. They represented 80% of my
everything. Yeah.
They represented so much, such that when that happened, I realized that it was such a good thing it did happen when it happened, because from that point forward, no client in my portfolio represents more than 12% of my overall revenue. And I do that strategically because you do not want to be in a situation where 30 or 40% of your revenue is one client. So if you're selling ebooks and that's 95% of your money, start selling something else to offset in the event that that dips.
Are you listening, viewers? Here? Yeah, we have a lot of authors who, well, we don't have a lot of authors, but there are a lot of authors out there who put their books exclusively into Amazon. It's the biggest bookstore in the world. Of course, you want to have your books at Amazon. But what we tell them too is, just like a financial advisor would plead with you not to put all your eggs into one basket in case the market changes, the same thing holds true with putting all of your gusto, all of your books, everything into a single retailer, because guess what? If something happens with that retailer, like those algorithms change, you're dead in the water until you get out of that exclusivity agreement. So
yeah,
spread it around. Gosh. Okay. I wanted to bring up a quick comment here. Where did it go? From Beth Cox. Hey, Beth, thanks for being here this week. She says, I've got a 6-year plan for myself. 2024 is the end of year 1.
That's awesome. 6 years. That's aggressive, and I love it.
Yeah, excellent. I can't say that for myself. What is my plan? That's a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I have to ask you this.
Yeah.
How do you define work-life balance? Because this is an entire chapter of your book, and I think some people have these kind of warped sense of what work-life balance should be. So what's your definition, Julie?
You know, there is no work-life balance. So let's just put that out there. It's ethereal. It's a concept. It sounds
I'm out of here.
Yeah. So what I will tell you is, go back to when people say to you, oh, I want work-life balance, look, I started a family. I had twin girls when I was 6 years into my business. There is no work-life balance. If you are focused on your business or focused on your writing, you are choosing that over some other area of your business. And there is nothing wrong with that. But what I do tell people, and what I talk about in the book, is you have to find what works for you. If what works for you is to work 4 hours in the morning, have lunch with your kids, and then work 4 hours in the afternoon, but create that structure, set those boundaries for yourself, that's where you'll actually find, it's not true balance, but that's where you'll find your sweet spot. And so when I became a mom and was a CEO, I was trying to grow my business. I didn't know what I was doing. It was terrible, but I had to create these boundaries so that, look, I turned my computer off at 5 and I was with my kids until they went to bed. I still did work after they went to bed, but I literally had to create a hard line, and that allowed me to balance both. But there is no magic. There's no magic pill. There's no magic balance structure. If there was one, we would all be doing it. We wouldn't all be kind of stressed out and trying to figure out how to juggle life. But I do encourage you to find something that is going to make you happy and allow you to be focused in those split times. So like when I'm with my kids, I'm with them. I'm not taking work calls. I'm not looking at emails. When I'm at work, I'm also focusing there. I'm not thinking about my laundry, the groceries, the errands I have to run. I'm completely focused at the business. And so I do think it takes a bit of discipline to get there. But if you're searching for this magic schedule where you're on the beach at 3 every day, I mean, it's great to aspire to, but it's not always realistic.
Right. I love that. And I think it's important to realize that the pendulum swings the other way sometimes too. Like you could be so into work 1 week or for a couple of weeks or maybe even for a couple of months, but then eventually the pendulum's going to swing back so you have some more free time. And like you said, you have to set those boundaries.
Yes.
Sometimes that's hard to do, but I think the more you do it, the more it becomes natural for you to do that.
I agree. And I do also think sometimes life forces it, right? So I know for me, before I had kids, I would work 24 hours a day. I would take text messages from clients. I had no boundary. And I do think becoming a mom forced me to understand that
That's not
boundaries
going to
are
happen with kids.
like, yeah, it's not. And here's the thing, boundaries aren't bad. As long as you communicate your boundaries, like all of my clients know that our office is closed at a certain time. They don't text us, they don't email us after hours. And it's because
Yeah.
they know that this is the structure that we've communicated to them. So that's why I said, find what works for you. You might not be the same as everybody else, but just find what works for you and just understand that you might have to sacrifice one for the other. And that's okay.
Yeah, it happens sometimes. Just don't beat
Mhm.
yourself up over it as well.
Correct.
Julie, I wanted to quickly touch upon public speaking for a bit. We're going to have an episode dedicated to public speaking next week with our friend Maddie Dalrymple. But in your book, you were talking about preparing for the speaking engagements that you had, and you prepared, and you prepared, and you prepared.
Yes.
And that wasn't just the script that you were going over. That was the practice, the rehearsing, the hearing yourself back, all of that. Why is that so important to you to be that prepared with public speaking? I mean, don't some people just have a natural ability to wing it?
I would love to think that. And I would say, you know what, I've been speaking publicly for like 25 years, right? And you would think that I would just pop on, or even these podcasts, right? Like before I'm going on a podcast or going on a TV segment,
Yeah.
I still get nervous, even though I've practiced. I understand, what the topics are going to be. But
Yeah.
I can tell you this, the more prepared you are, should someone ask you something you're not prepared for, or should something go wrong that you hadn't
Yeah.
planned on, you aren't backpedaling, right? And I think with public speaking, being over prepared is just being diligent, right? Because if you are speaking in front of a group of people, they're there to hear something that you have to say. And so sometimes you have to put those scripts together so that you make sure you get your relevant points across. You can go off script a little. I mean, that's okay. But I do think it's incredibly important to be prepared. Even in sales meetings that I go into, to this day, I review the client lead. I look at their background. I do all of this research that I guarantee you 9 out of 10 people do not do, but I do it so that if they ask me a question or say, hey, do you know what we do? I can repeat back to them that I do. And so preparation is the best way that you can deliver great content. So I just think it's so incredibly important. And I'm glad I had that in my early work experience, that it taught me to be prepared. And so I still get nervous, but if I'm prepared, I'm not as nervous going through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you included that in your book. And I totally agree. Because when the first time I was asked to do some public speaking, maybe I've mentioned this on the show before, but it was the CEO of Smashwords, because Smashwords was taking off. And he was doing all the conferences, all the speaking. And then when he first asked me, hey, could you help me split some of this public speaking load? Like every cell in my body was screaming, say no, say no. I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But that thrust me into really, really learning more about the publishing industry, because I had spent the first half of my entire career in high tech. It was high tech PR, and we both had this PR background.
Yeah.
So that's what I knew. I had my whole network was in high tech, and I moved in the publishing industry. And I'm like, I didn't know the first thing, so I just dove into the preparation. And every time I delivered a presentation, I would just go over it and over it and over it and over it until I was sick of it.
Yes.
But like you said, that nervousness, that barometer just starts to come down over time. And I've been doing this for years too, and I still get nervous. I still get nervous before these episodes.
Yes.
But I have finally learned to accept the fact that it's not going to go away. I'm still going to have the butterflies or whatever, but that nervousness is a gift, because
it is.
It forces you to prepare, and to prepare accordingly. We all know people who seemingly wing it in these things, but they're not winging it. The best of the best are not winging it. They've prepared. They know how to prepare.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are others who, they might be witty and full of charm, but you can tell they haven't prepared. They're just using that charisma to kind of carry them over the line.
Exactly. And we've all sat through those presentations too, right? When the person isn't
Yeah.
prepared and you're just like, oh my gosh, like we could have covered this in 5 minutes. So,
Yeah.
I never want to, the feedback I never want to hear is like, oh, what a snooze, or like, oh my gosh, that was, too much. So being prepared helps you stay in tune to your audience as well. Instead of worrying about what's coming next in your presentation, you can also, spend more time focusing on who's engaged and involve people, right? As you're doing those presentations.
Absolutely. And before I forget, I want to make sure that people know what book we're talking about here. So I'm going to bring up your book cover. It's going to
Awesome.
cover our faces here for a little bit, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Here it is. So this is Julie's book, everybody. Dare to Become from the corner office. I'm sorry, from the corner booth to the corner office. I knew I was going to screw something up.
That's okay. That's why the picture's there.
Right. Yeah. We can't trust me with reading things. But I highly encourage all of you to check it out. You can get it at, your favorite bookstores out there. It's available everywhere, isn't it, Julie?
It is, yes, virtually on every platform, right? So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's also in Barnes & Noble, Hudson Booksellers as well. So it's in 22 airports around the country, and also available on my own personal website.
Excellent. Excellent. And ebooks in print as well.
Yep.
Are you going to do an audiobook version?
So we just wrapped up. I actually did record my own audio. I did it myself. Nice. And yeah, we are just wrapping up the editing. So by January, I will also have the audiobook available as well.
Excellent. Look at you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to remove that. Okay. And gosh, I told you this was going to go by like this.
I know.
Every week. I'm like, whoa, it's at the end of time. Before I forget, another thing here. If you want to learn more about Julie and her audiobook that's coming out and everything else that she's doing that's wonderful, go to Cropp.com. You can learn all about Julie. Can they keep in touch with you there? Can they contact you there?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, they can submit the form on the website that comes directly to me. So please do. If you've read the book or you're thinking about reading it or have learned something, please share that. I think my biggest gift from writing this book is just hearing from other people and what they've taken from reading it. And so I love it when folks share that with me.
Yeah, I think you'll all really enjoy the book. It is full of gems. You don't have to be a manufacturer or opening a bakery or anything like that. The advice and the expertise in this book can apply to all areas. I read it. It's really, really good. Now, Julie, before we close up, you ended the book with a beautiful epilogue about leaps of faith and trusting your instincts and kind of taking a look back from, as your Uncle Larry said, whence you came.
Yeah.
If we had to boil our conversation down to a sort of a single point that you hope our viewers and listeners would remember, what would that be?
I think we've talked a lot of great themes today about how we've moved forward in the face of adversity and how we've, overcome different things. But I will say that there's inherent value in looking back to find your way forward. And I will say, just like when I wrote this book, I took stock in my career. I took stock in where I'd come from. And that's really how my story unfolded. So I would encourage everyone to remember that there is value in looking back to find your way forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. As we come to a close, just wanted to remind our viewers out there, if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe to this video and to all the different videos on self-publishing industry, self-publishing insiders, we really appreciate that because that enables us to reach out to experts like Julie to invite them on the show. And then they actually agree and they come on and we learn from them. Also, folks, if you could bookmark dddlive.com, if you do so, then you'll see from week to week who our upcoming guests will be and what the topic will be. And then finally, if you're sort of on the fringes of self-publishing and you want to learn more and you're thinking about doing it yourself, you can sign up for a free account simply by going to digital.com. To our viewers out there, thanks again for joining us this week. We hope you'll join us again next week where we talk about public speaking. To our regulars, thanks for coming in and week out. And to our new viewers, thank you guys for giving us a chance. But especially, I want to thank Julie. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed every second of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading my book. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm so grateful to be here. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. For everybody else, we will see you next week. Julie, hang out in the green room back there. We've got some snacks. I'll meet you back there in a second.
Sounds great.
Bye, everybody.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created D2D Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at drafttodigital.com.